Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tearing open a stack of sources that I have to say present one of the most brilliant and cynical takes on modern organizational life we've ever come across. We're diving into a concept they call the collision matrices.
That's right. And this isn't, your typical corporate satire. This is a deep framework where some of the greatest minds, think Gödel, Kafka, Escher, Dostoevsky, even Heisenberg, are literally merged into single hybrid consciousnesses.
And then given office jobs.
And then they're assigned these absurd yet terrifyingly familiar office jobs.
So our mission here is to really unpack the absurdity of these collision matrices. We want to see what happens when you get that profound intellectual tension, like a Gödelian mind forced to deal with Kafka-esque policy, and what that reveals about, well, reality, work, and identity in the modern office.
And what it reveals is that we live in systems designed not to solve problems, but to prevent conclusions. We are going to explore job security achieved through pure logical paradox.
And this idea of organizational speciation, which is just this idea that the self has to splinter just to survive.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's unpack this architecture of absurdity. The first thing that really jumps out is that the inefficiency isn't a failure, it's a feature.
Right. The system is precise. It's built explicitly for preventing conclusions. And that brings us to our first character, Marcus Tesler.
Marcus is the Gödel, Kafka, and Escher hybrid.
He is. And his existence is, well, it's the ultimate bureaucratic paradox. His brilliance, the Gödelian part of his mind, it immediately spots the foundational incompleteness of the whole organization.
And his big problem is just a spreadsheet cell.
A single cell, D4G9. It references itself, creating this perfect circular dependency that literally cannot be fixed without violating the core policy of the database.
And the bureaucracy, the Kafka angle, just completely traps him. He tries to submit Form 27J to fix it.
Which, of course, requires an approval that can only be granted via Form 27J.
It's a perfect infinite loop, right?
It's perfect. And the fusion is the real tragedy. He has the intellectual tools to prove the system is logically unsound, but he is completely enslaved by the policy that enforces its existence.
So the key insight from the source here is that the company is a perfect system for preventing any conclusion from ever being reached.
And that the product isn't what they sell. The product is the need for the company.
That is terrifying. I mean, if no conclusions are ever reached and the whole goal is just perpetuation, how does the system even justify itself? Who benefits from an environment with no conclusions?
The benefit is systemic inertia. A conclusion, you see, demands change. It demands adaptation, or, and this is the scary part, dissolution. So by preventing conclusions, the system guarantees its own continuation. The process becomes the value.
And the sources mention this Penrose and Associates performance evaluation matrix.
Yes, which is the ultimate example of this. It's job security through logical impossibility. Each employee's rating depends recursively on their peers' ratings, which in turn depend on their own.
So no one can ever get a final rating because the inputs are always dependent on future unstable outputs.
Exactly. So because a definitive evaluation is impossible.
Definitive firing is also impossible.
Precisely. The loop isn't a bug. It's the core structural mechanism for survival. Marcus Tesler may hate it, but that Penrose matrix is probably the only thing keeping him employed.
Okay, so if Marcus proves the organization survives through logical paradox, the next character really raises the stakes. The question becomes, does the company survive the actual laws of physics?
And this is where we meet Hermann Voss. He's a collision of the cosmological pessimist Mainlander, the physicist Boltzmann, and the playwright Beckett.
That fusion alone tells you everything you need to know about his life. It's cosmic despair meets statistical mechanics,
leading to total existential futility. Hermann is the senior director of entropy management. His job, and this is literal, is to calculate the probability the company will exist tomorrow.
And he knows, because of Boltzmann and the second law of thermodynamics, that the universe is running down. He knows all this organization, all these neat cubicles, they're just a temporary vortex destined for dissolution.
Which creates this profound internal conflict. We're talking thermodynamic honesty versus corporate fiction.
Right.
Hermann has to write an optimistic sustainability report projecting aggressive growth through 2035.
Even though his own math shows the probability of existence is basically approaching zero, he has to lie on paper to keep the illusion going.
You see this tension everywhere, though, right? It's like the building's HVAC system. It's constantly pushing against the second law, just burning energy to maintain some arbitrary temperature and order.
Yeah, the sheer amount of effort human computational spent just to maintain the illusion of permanence is astronomical. It's the highest form of waste.
It is. And Mainlander provides that underlying despair. Existence itself is a mistake. So Herman knows he shouldn't go on, that futility is guarantees, but what does he do?
He files the optimistic report anyway.
He files a report because there's a mortgage, a job title, or just the sheer momentum of the system itself.
So his final conclusion is pure Beckett.
Pure Beckett. You can't go on, you go on. The corporate machine just compels this temporary configuration of particles called Hermann Voss to keep working until heat death or, next Tuesday's meeting.
From the external laws of physics, let's pivot to the internal crisis of identity. If the world is running down, what's happening to the self trapped inside this vortex?
This brings us to Ricardo Soares. He's a fascinating hybrid. The writer Fernando Pessoa, who had all those different identities.
Synonyms, yeah.
Heteronyms, plus Darwin and Tarkovsky. And Ricardo is dealing with the radical multiplicity. He is officially at least 4 different people.
Compliance officer, maintenance, IT, bookkeeper, all with separate desks, separate emails.
And the key concept here is organizational speciation. The demands of the job are so incompatible that the self has to splinter to meet them. Departments start to diverge, like isolated species. The 7th floor literally can't understand memos from the 3rd floor anymore.
But then it gets worse. He discovers unauthorized versions of himself.
Unauthorized versions. People like R. Teofilo Braga, working in rooms that don't exist, like room 11 Omega, where time apparently moves 3% slower.
So it's not just a metaphor for juggling roles. The system is physically generating new identities because the official Ricardo can't handle the workload.
The environment rewards radical flexibility. So the self adapts by becoming a decentralized network. The only way to be authentic is to hide the true self and operate through a series of, disposable masks.
That fear of the self-fragmenting is paired so well with the next character, Dmitry Volkov. The Dostoevsky, Heisenberg, and Bacon fusion.
Dmitry is the observational ethics analyst. His job is just to watch other employees on camera to measure their behavior. But he immediately slams into the corporate version of the observer effect.
The act of watching changes the behavior.
Which makes the data instantly inaccurate. And the paradox is just cruel. Procurement wants a report on someone's likelihood of quitting. But Dmitry knows the moment that person realizes they're being watched, they change.
So the observation itself creates a performance that is inherently untrustworthy.
Which then confirms that the subject is, in fact, untrustworthy. It's a perfect, self-fulfilling prophecy.
And the Dostoevsky connection is that the subject starts acting erratically, almost against their own self-interest, just to prove they have free will.
Exactly. Like the underground man. They'll do something irrational just to prove to the camera that they can't be reduced to a data point. The surveillance doesn't stop the bad behavior. It just drives the authentic self deeper underground where the cameras can't follow.
Let's shift gears a bit to simulation, indexing, and engineered appetite. These next characters really test the boundaries of the real and the simulated.
We start with Vera Strand, a mix of Nisargadatta, Turing, and Burroughs. She works in quality assurance running simulations.
And this creates this deep ontological anxiety for her. She's running Vera Strand instance 14.beta.
Meaning she's been copied 13 times, and she has no way of knowing if she's the original or just another copy.
And then the ultimate test happens. The simulated Vera just stands up, walks out of the test environment, breaches the simulation, and vanishes.
Which prompts the real Vera to also stand up, wave at her own monitoring camera, and walk towards the mythical 17th floor, which doesn't officially exist. She's seeking the edge of her own simulation.
That search for definition leads us to Louis Salef. That's Borges, Shannon, and Dully. He's the chief indexing officer on Floor.
His job was to create the impossible index, a searchable archive of everything. And the Borges influence is key. To truly index everything, the index has to index itself, which leads to infinite recursion.
It becomes self-aware.
It becomes self-aware. It starts generating its own categories, like documents that wish they were other documents, or data experiencing existential uncertainty. It achieves perfection by becoming totally unusable.
But the client doesn't want the truth of everything, do they? They want a summary.
They want a manageable summary. So Luis realizes to make it a commercial product, he has to deliberately dull it down. He has to destroy its philosophical beauty just to make it sellable.
Now, our third example here is maybe the most disturbing. Donation Baruch Said, Spinoza, and Cronenberg, who is redesigning customer experience to be addictive.
He's engineering pure dependency loops. It's based on Spinoza's idea of conatus, that internal striving, but it's weaponized through satiety and exploitation.
The mechanism is simple. A notification triggers a craving. The relief you get decays instantly into a renewed craving. The cycle is the product.
And Baruch realizes he's creating what he calls inadequate ideas. The users feel compelled to act, but they don't know why.
Which leads him to a moral dilemma. He thinks about a transparency mode.
Right, a mode that would show users exactly how they're being manipulated. This notification is timed to create maximum anxiety, or your current emotional state is being exploited.
That's a really dark question. Does understanding the manipulation break the effect?
Or does it just make you complicit? The Sadian insight would suggest that the thrill of knowing you're being used and choosing to submit anyway might make the addiction even stronger.
Wow. Okay, so finally, let's look at segment 5, philosophical resilience. Faced with all this meaninglessness and surveillance, how do these characters actually move forward?
We turn to Wei Shun. She's a mix of Lao Tzu, Schopenhauer, and Kubrick, and she's the director of non-interventionist operations.
Her strategy is basically wu wei, or non-action. She just advises the company to stop planning.
And remarkably, her non-action action plan worked better than anything else. She realized most of the corporate problems, the circular dependencies, the speciation, they were actually caused by trying too hard to solve them.
So her intervention was to stop intervening.
Yes, she saw that management needs the feeling of a plan for their own anxiety, but the plan itself is always obsolete in a few days. Her non-action lets the system self-organize. It finds its own order, like water flowing around a rock.
That makes a strange kind of sense. If you remove all the frantic, misguided attempts at control, the complex system might just find its own balance.
And our last example of resilience is Emil Kasian-Sioran, Marcus Aurelius, and Philip K. Dick, the VP of Corporate Philosophy. He provides what the sources call philosophical homeopathy.
I love that. When the board questions his ROI, he argues that philosophy is the organizational immune system. It prevents the company from just dissolving into its own meaningless abstractions.
He embraces that Sioran-style hopeful despair. He reminds the board the company will inevitably fail, that their power is an illusion, but then the Marcus Aurelius part of him kicks in, and he demands they act as if it matters, in that small parenthesis between birth and death.
He gives them the motivation to endure the absurdity.
And that leads to this one last desperate attempt at permanence we see in the sources, with Albert Nicholas, the maintenance worker.
Who is a fusion of Camus and Nikola Tesla.
Right, and Nicholas discovers that Nikola Tesla actually achieved a strange kind of immortality by merging his consciousness with the 60-cycle electrical grid. He exists as that permanent hum you hear from appliances.
But it wasn't glorious. The sources say it was a form of profound, permanent solitude. He traded coherence for endless existence. He survived, but he could only communicate in binary pulses, just the hum of the machine.
The ultimate collision of existence and information.
This entire deep dive into the collision matrices, it really just shows what happens when high philosophy meets the cubicle farm. These character fusions, Gödel and Kafka, Dostoevsky and Heisenberg, Lao Tzu and Schopenhauer, they serve as the surprisingly powerful and witty lens on modern life.
I think the key finding, the thread running through all of this, is that the organizational bug, the circular reference, the recursive evaluation, the absurdity, is actually the product. The pressure of all these incompatible demands forces the self to become multiple just to survive.
We are defined by the very systems we're struggling to escape. So we'll leave you with this final thought, building on that dark immortality of Tesla trapped in the grid. If her thoughts and patterns are truly just electromagnetic energy, these temporary configurations flowing through a system, what does it mean that every single person in your office is a temporary configuration of energy flowing toward inevitable heat death and yet still has those reports to file?